Hello. Hi, Andrea. Good to see you. Um, can everyone hear me over the music? Also, go ahead and make sure that when you type in the chat that you change the to everyone instead of host and panelists. Otherwise, only I can see your your messages. Amazing. Hi, Jamie. So good to see you. Good to hear. We're gonna start in a few minutes. Yeah, if everyone wants to introduce themselves, your name, where you're from. I'm in Los Angeles. My name is Lauren. My artist name is Minnie Bear. Excited to have you here. It's been a chaotic day. Somehow, I thought today was going to be my light day, but it ended up being jam-packed. Nice. New York, Dallas, Bellingham, Washington. Hi, Megan. I'm from Raleigh. Oh, hi, Intentions. Ooh, based in LA. Nice. Have you been to any of the in-person Femme House events? Nice. Amazing. Yeah, I don't think I can really quite announce it yet, but we're gonna have another course coming up at some point, and we're gonna, just like we did last time, I think it was last August, we did a live stream course, but it was also in person, so we're gonna do a similar thing for all of you LA people. So my best guess is we're probably not going to have too many people filter in. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But this is being recorded, by the way. So yeah, the recording will be sent out at some point, and then you'll be able to review stuff that I'm going to be going over today. I am going to be using Push, but it's really honestly primarily just so I can play stuff in. But I actually also might just draw the MIDI in. But yeah, you don't need a Push to understand these concepts. So this is Ableton Push. Ableton's a MIDI controller. But yeah, I'm just really just using it to play things in maybe from time to time. Cool. I'm just gonna turn on this music. It's distracting me a little bit. But yeah, how is everyone doing today? Happy Friday. I'm just gonna give a little intro about myself. Before I do that, actually, is there anyone here who it is your first workshop? Well, I cannot speak today. Is there anyone here for the first time at a Femme House? Femme House workshop. Nice. First timers. Great. All right, amazing. All right, I'm gonna actually turn off the music because I'm really bad at multitasking today. Nice, first timer here as well. Well, welcome on in. My name is Lauren. My artist name is Minnie Bear, and I'm the Chief Education Officer at Femme House. I'll explain what that means in a moment, but essentially, Femme House is a nonprofit whose aim is to make the technical areas of music more gender diverse, and beyond that, just really kind of um, making all areas of the music industry more equitable when it comes to gender. Um, we've expanded a lot in the past few years. We really just started off doing in-person workshops, I think starting like 2019. And then when 2020 hit, we moved everything online, started doing live stream workshops, monthly free workshops, and then we started launching online courses. So, uh, yeah, it's been very exciting to watch it grow. In addition to that, we have these scholarship programs, which, by the way, I think it might be open right now. So, to apply. So I'm going to go ahead and actually maybe drop that link in. We have a fellowship program. So our FEMME House Foundation Fellowship Program exclusively for our BIPOC family. And then the Teresa Velasquez Memorial Fellowship exclusively for our LGBTQ family. Applications open now through April 2024. Amazing. So I'm going to drop that link here in the chat. But yeah, definitely encourage you to apply in addition to getting financial, is it called financial aid? Funds for gear. You also fellowship, wow, I cannot speak today. Fellowship receiver, fellows receive one-on-one mentorship with me, one-on-one lessons essentially. But yeah, that's one thing that we've been doing. And then also we've had stages at various music festivals. We have different contests to play these, different FEMME House stages. So anyways, if you don't already follow FEMME House on Instagram, I would encourage you to do that because anytime there are opportunities, they post it there. So that being said, what I do, my role within FEMME House is I essentially curate the music production curriculum. So the online workshops, topics, the courses. I build out all of the curriculum for the courses, and I've been doing that since we started. So it's been a wild ride. In addition to working with FEMME House, I also teach with recently I've been teaching the past year or so at UCLA and at Occidental College. And yeah, I'm an artist, I'm a DJ, and then the IG. This is FEMME House. Sorry, I don't have the link on me. Yeah, and then lastly, actually, it might be good to share our Discord. So we have a Discord server that is a great place to connect outside of here. So there's a bunch of channels for sharing your music, anything you've got going on, shows you have coming up, and just to generally chat and connect outside of here. Nice. Thank you. Yeah, and feel free to drop your IGs in the chat so you can connect also there as well. So today we have a very special workshop on essentially intro to music theory for producers. Is there anyone here that does not really consider themselves a beginner when it comes to music theory? Just out of curiosity. Take us up here. Oh wow, studied formal music for 18 plus years, but it's been a while. That's a long time. Did fully learn this as a child for piano purposes, total beginner, but it's all gone. Okay, well, this will probably be a good refresher. This is, and then the reason why I was asking is that this is predominantly just a very beginner theory lesson. I'm going to try to pack as much as I can in the next hour and a half or so. I think usually our workshops kind of run about 2 hours, but I think that it's a long time to talk about theory, which is a very dry subject. So I'm going to try to be as efficient as possible. But yeah, what I'm going to be going over is a little bit of like rhythm theory, the concept of like notes, intervals, scales, chords, and then all how that applies to DAW, and then also how you can use Ableton Live specifically to your advantage when it comes to if you're not super familiar with theory. Uh, I am going to be demoing with Ableton Live 11. Their version 12 just came out. When was that? Like a month ago, month and a half ago? I don't even know at this point. But yeah, so there's some actually really, really cool stuff that they added. But I'm not going to be talking about that today because I haven't had enough time to like sit with it before I want to teach it. But I will tell you now, little sneak preview, that we are going to be doing some content related to Live 12 soon. So yeah, if you're curious to learn all of the new tools that Ableton Live 12 comes with and how that can relate to theory, just you wait. This will not be on Teachable afterwards. So our workshops, essentially we live stream it on Zoom, and then they're recorded within Zoom basically to the cloud, and then the links to the cloud recordings will go out at a certain point. So the only content that lives on Teachable afterwards would be any courses that we have. So if you are curious to take a look at courses that we've done in the past, which is at this point, it's been quite a few, you can check that out here. And wow, I got so distracted. I don't even think that I posted the Discord link as well. Okay. One last thing, just a little plug for myself before we get started. Is yeah, take good notes, folks. Oh, well, this is going to be recorded. So just to clarify right now, I don't even know if you can see the icon, but this is being recorded to the cloud. So you will get a link to the recording after the fact. So you can review it at some point in time. So, but yeah, last plug here is I have a thing that I'm DJing tonight, which is super fun at Sayers Club. So if you're in LA, playing at the Sayers Club, my friend Staria is also playing, and we're celebrating Perry Farrell's birthday. If you're too young to know who he is, I was very surprised when I got this request because I was like, wait, that name, I know that name. But anyways, he was in a band called Jane's Addiction, which was a huge deal in the 90s, and he's also the co-founder of Lollapalooza. But yeah, anyhow, I'm going to be DJing that tonight. So if you want to go, we're giving our FEMME House fam guest list spots. So feel free to message me. You can private message me now if you want to go, and just message me with your name and I can get you added. Thank you. Yeah, that's crazy, huh? All right, so let's get started without further ado. Let me go ahead and share. Please send what? The link? All right, let me do this first. Let me hide some stuff. And then we will share the doc for today's lecture. Just kidding. It's not a lecture. I'm going to try to make theory as fun as possible. Oh. Oh, I see. Okay, hold on. Let me. Sorry, I need to add someone's name here, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. Sorry, if you just DM'd me, can you please type your name in the chat so I can copy and paste it easily? Thank you. I see those names there. And then, yeah, so Andrea, if you could just like message me your name first and last, please. Thanks for your patience. Sorry, a lot of like multitasking today. Thank you. I appreciate it. Oh, I'm excited to see some Femme House people tonight. Should be a good time. All right. Alrighty, let's get into it. So actually, before I screen share, are there any specific things that anyone's wanting to cover in terms of theory? Just reminding you that it is, an intro, so we're not going to get like super deep into the weeds of more like intermediate or advanced theory. But if there are specific, because I know a few of you mentioned that you're a little bit rusty or haven't, revisited the topic in a while. So if there's anything specific that you wanted to go over, please let me know. All right, how do you find out which key your song is in? That's a good question. All right. Where is the Zoom controls? There we go. Share. And we're going to share my desktop. Okay, so I'm going to write that down actually. Mm-hmm. When you're mixing, how can you tell if Rekordbox has mislabeled the key? That's a very specific question, but yes. All right, I might tag these on at the end. Cool. Yeah, and if any questions also pop up throughout, I think because there are so few, there's a handful of you today, but I think because there aren't like 300 people in the chat, for example, I think it's okay to type in the webinar chat if you have any questions. But then also just so you know, there is a Q&A item, which should be at the bottom of your screen that you can click on if you also want to type a question there, and I can easily see it. All right, so let's talk about rhythm first. We're gonna start there. So I just made this little doc here. Just some basic concepts. So what is rhythm? Rhythm is essentially just a pattern of notes that are repeated throughout music at a specific tempo. The beat is essentially like the pulse, typically what you would be tapping along to as you're listening. So if we're relating this to, let's say, like a DAW, that would be like our tempo, which it could also be referred to as BPM, would be how fast or slow the song is. So, in Ableton Live, I can adjust the tempo here. And if I turn on the metronome, which is this button here, if I turn this on, which can also be referred to as the click, it's going to essentially tap along, right? One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that click that we hear is basically our pulse, which is the beat. Bar or measure is just a division in time in which notes are grouped. So again, if we refer to Ableton Live here on the grid, these numbers here are referring to bar numbers. And again, it's just dividing time, which really that's what music is. It's just time divided when it comes to the arrangement. Time signature refers to the number of beats per bar or measure. And then when we talk about rhythm, we need to talk about the idea of strong and weak beats. So downbeats are considered what are called strong beats. So when we say downbeats, we typically mean like the first beat of a bar or beat one. So going back here, actually, if I were to count this out again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So here to here, 1 and 2, this is one bar, right? And then if I were to, like, as I'm counting out the beat here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, let's do this. I'm gonna click and drag here to highlight this time. And then I'm going to create insert empty MIDI clip. And the reason why I'm going to do that is one reason why I love using a DAW like Ableton Live when it to kind of like relate concepts of theory is we can kind of see things in a really visual way. So for example, over here, this is length 1. So this is just referring to the fact that this is 1 bar. Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. Hold on, I'm just gonna pause my share for a moment. Okay, let's unpause that. Okay. So this is 1 bar. So what I'm looking up here is this 1 bar long. Now, what's neat is I can right click and change my grid. So for example, I can set 1 bar. And so this is the length of 1 bar here. If I right click, I can select 1/4, which is referring to what's called quarter notes. So, and that's referring to, I'm going to jump back here to the idea of strong and weak beats here. It's referring to the idea of subdivisions and note values. So a note value is just referring to the relative duration of a note, and then the subdivision refers to a beat or a note divided into smaller values. So actually a good way to take a look at this too is if we have another instrument like, yeah, we have drums here. So if I draw, I'm going to right click here and change this grid back to 1 bar. And if I just double click to draw in this note here, the neat thing about Ableton Live is if I change this grid and then I double click in to draw a MIDI note, this is basically going to draw in the note length based upon what my grid is. So basically it added a note that's 1 bar long. So 2, 3, 4, right? So this note is basically the span of 1 bar, which is a measure of time. Now, if I right click and divide that in half, right? Let me delete that now. So I'm going to press the B key to get my pencil tool. So now I can click, it's going to add that, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then if I right click, divide this in half, I get quarter notes. So now I can click, 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 click. And I've essentially just divided this in quarters, right? I've divided the whole note into quarters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? If I divide the quarter note in half, I get eighth notes. So we can kind of visually see what that actually looks like here. And then what that's going to sound like is this. 1 and 2. And the way that we would typically count that out is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? If I right click, divide the eighth note in half, I get 16th notes. And that's going to look like that. And it'll sound like this. It's going to sound really fast. It's going to sound like it's fast. It's kind of an illusion, but it's one. And the way that we would count it out is 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. So I'm going to show you what this, how this would relate to, why these concepts relate to, you know, creating something like a drum pattern. But basically the idea of these subdivisions here is you have notes that are a certain length long, and then if you keep dividing it in half, you get a certain value. So again, quarter note divided in half is an eighth note divided in half is a 16th note. If anyone has any questions about that, feel free to drop it in the chat. But going back to drums here, so I'm going to go ahead and just create a clip that is a bar long. So basically, if I were to right click and change this grid to a quarter note, um, one of the reasons why it's really helpful to understand the concept of subdivisions is I can basically say, like, I want to place a kick on every quarter note. So kind of going back to what I was saying of like, oh, when I turn on the metronome and I play it, that's my pulse. That's my beat. So maybe I want to have the kick play on every single, pulse, every single beat. So that would be like this, where I'm basically creating a quarter note. So we call that 4 on the floor kick, right? 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. So, and then, what I could do is instead of placing a kick on every quarter note, maybe I would place it on beats 1 and 3. So, referring back to what I was saying about like strong and weak beats. So, the strongest beat is going to be beat 1, which is this first beat here. So, if we go up here, what we're looking at, since this is only 1 bar long, is beat 1, beat 2, 1.2 is beat 2, beat 3, 1.3 is beat 3, and then beat 4. So if I place a kick on, let's say, beat 1 and then beat 3, what this sounds like is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? So the 1 is a pretty strong beat. Beat 3 is not as strong as beat 1, but it's pretty strong. When I say that 1 is the strongest beat, if you don't place the kick on beat 1, and right now we don't have anything really placed on anything else, it's kind of hard to know where we are in time, right? Like, for all we know, this could be beat 1. So, everything is relative to one another, but usually it's pretty important to have the kick on beat 1 unless you're trying to subvert expectations and kind of create some tension. So just putting that out there. So we can have, like, typically the kick would be on beat 1, maybe beat 3. If you have like a house type beat where it's like 4 on the floor, you would have something like this, right? And typically we would also have some sort of percussive element on what's called the backbeat, which would be beats 2 and 4. So for example, snare, we could place on beat 2, and then beat 4, right? Or maybe we could place a clap on beats 2 and 4. And notice that, having the claps placed on beats 2 and 4 kind of creates a little bit more of a groove, whereas like without, let's just say we didn't even have kicks on beats 2 and 4. If we just had something like this, there's not a whole lot going on, but as soon as we add these claps, beats 2 and 4, there's some kind of like back and forth thing going on. So beats 2 and 4, not as strong as beat 1, but they place an important role in terms of like creating some sort of like backbeat, which kind of like overall helps to create a groove. So, all right, so right now we've got things placed on beats 1, 2, 3, and 4. The bass drum and the claps, the kick and the clap kind of like have their different roles. And, I can right click here, select 8th grid, and maybe just draw out some hi-hats. So I'm placing them on every single 8th note here. And the fascinating thing about subdividing is that even though the tempo is the same, I haven't changed anything, right? It feels like it's faster. It feels like there's some sort of like forward momentum because of the fact that I've subdivided something. Now imagine if rather than having 8th note hi-hats, I drew in some 16th note hi-hats. And that feels even faster because, again, when we're dividing the eighth note in half and we're getting 16th notes, it just kind of like feels like it's faster. So kind of going back to what I was reviewing in terms of like rhythm. So we've got strong and weak beats. Downbeats are considered strong beats. The first beat of a bar, beat 1, is considered the strongest, with beat 3 being strong but not as strong as beat 1. And then the second and fourth beats are considered not as strong. So, you know, if we have like this kick and clap thing going on with these, like, let's actually bring back the eighth note hi-hats here. I'm going to make this slightly more interesting by selecting every other hi-hat and lowering the velocity. So I'm basically lowering the volume of the first and every other hi-hat, so that way these hi-hats here are accented or louder. Right? Cool. So what if we were to add some other percussive elements that are on like weaker beats? So for example, not on beat 1, maybe like on the and beats. And when I say the and, I mean usually like if I switch to an eighth note grid here, usually that would mean 113 or something, or it's like if I count this out. And by the way, because I didn't mention this, but if you right click and select the grid, what that basically means is that if I use my arrow key and count this out, every single line that you see is referring to an eighth note. So if I count this out, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's kind of neat. So again, if I were to, you know, place notes on, you know, weaker beats, that would be like this one. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And also, if I right click and change this to a 16th note grade, that could also be like 1 E and a. So that's how we would count it out. 1 E and a, 2 E and a. So maybe like E and these particular notes. Basically anything that's not beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4 would be some interesting places to place notes, and I'm going to show you why in a moment. So let me see if I have any interesting. Oh, we've got this rim shot here. So I'm going to see what happens if I place this rim shot like here, and then maybe here, and then here. So that's kind of cool. And just so we can hear this a little bit better, I'm going to switch out that stick with another sound here. Let's choose. Ooh, that's so. Oh. Let's do. Something like this one shot. Sorry, these sounds are so loud. I'm going to tear this down here. Oops. Yeah, something like that. Okay, sorry. I'm not going to hyperfixate on finding the right sound, but just very easy to do, as many of us know. But yeah, so that's just a good example of placing sounds in unexpected places on not strong beats. And so that would be an example of syncopation, where rhythms emphasize what are called the offbeats. And they're usually like not usually, but can be what are called accents, which refers to the emphasis placed on notes. And usually, particularly like if you're relating this to a DAW, an accent really just means that the volume is louder. So again, here I can, what I'm doing actually in order to adjust these velocities is I'm holding down the command key and then just dragging up or down. And so these boldly colored MIDI notes here is just indicating that these particular notes are accented. And basically like creating accents is a really great way of like creating interesting grooves. And if you play with syncopation, that's a really fun way to kind of play with groove as well. So, you know, because without, let's say like this, we just have this kind of like straight ahead beat, right? Where this kind of gives it, it just makes it a little bit more interesting, right? This is actually a great question for you. What is the deciding pattern, for example, whether something is really 80 or really 160? That's a good question because I think the only time I really think about that is when I'm preparing my tracks in Rekordbox. Usually the way that I think about it is like if I'm DJing, would it be easier for me to find things that are in 160 versus like looking, because like usually I like sort things by tempo. I know not everyone does that, but if it's something where I think it generally like feels like fast, then I usually like will set it at 160. But if I'm producing something, to be honest, I don't really think about it that much. I will usually set it at the higher tempo, like 160, for example. If I'm like, let's just say, wanting to create something where I have the ability to work in halftime. And what that's referring to, by the way, if you're not familiar with the concept of like halftime or double time, it just means that like I can create something in 160. So like this, for example, one in. So if I already count this out, 1, 2, so actually let's do this. Let me move this bar here. So if I draw in these kicks here, that feels fast. That feels really fast. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Right? So actually, let's make this 4 bars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be one way to count it out is 1, 2, 3, 4. But then you could be like 1. Let me delete these. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So in short, I'm not get super into it, but yeah, I can kind of play around with like writing and something or producing something that's like in a higher tempo that's like super fast, like 160, and then have a section where you like go into halftime where yeah, I feel like there's like a lot of like great examples of songs that do something like that. Yeah, anyhow. If you want to expand on that, let me know. But I think I'm going to spend a lot more time on talking about melody and harmony, but if particularly because we've done workshops on drums before and I don't want to get super into that right now, but if there's any specific questions that you have about rhythm, let me know. Andrea asked, can you quickly demonstrate removing beats to make it feel like 80-ish? Oh, okay, while keeping it 60. Okay. So oops. this is like our 160. And then let's create another clip here. I might need to make this like 8 bars long, actually. Sorry, I'm making this super simple right now, but okay, sorry. This is like because this probably takes me a lot longer than doing it like real time, and so I needed to like not talk for a moment. But if I had more time to do this, if we weren't talking about other types of theory, I would spend more time on this. But basically, uh, if I'm like trying to switch between, let's say, like maybe double time or half time, or switching from 160 to 80. So with the 161, I would basically use the grid that would make sense based upon 160. So for example, if I switch to quarter note, that means that literally every MIDI note that we see right now is placed on a quarter note, right? So actually, let me make this a little bit longer. So that would feel like this, right? Whereas with 80, what I'm doing is I'm basically trying to count out where beats 2 and 4 would be. So 1 and 2, 1 and 2. So rather than this like quarter note being like every kick, right? I'm just like kind of like counting it out. So, and like typically, if you want to kind of like memorize it, it really just means that your backbeats are going to be at 1.3 and 2.3. So like on beat 3, even though it's not technically beat 3. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And to make it really fun, if you're trying to make it like bouncy, you would play around with where like the kicks are. So for example, you wouldn't necessarily place like the second kick on like a downbeat. So like for example, this first kick is on a downbeat, but then this second one, if I count this out, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and, right? So it's like the second kick is on the and to make it bouncy. Does that answer your question? So like if you want to make it halftime, you just have to count where you need to place each beat. So even though it's not going to reflect on the grid that this technically is like count 2 and 4, this is where you would place it on the grid when you're going into halftime. Okay, cool. All right, so we are going to quickly switch to scales and more melodic and wow, my brain today is like fried. We're gonna basically talk about scales, notes, harmony, and all that jazz. But we're not gonna quite talk about jazz because that's advanced theory. All right. So, and by the way, if you want to explore this more, I think we do have a course that explores drums a lot more in depth. So, if you want your drums to be banging, highly encourage you to check that out. All right, so let's move on to talking about melodies. So, Oh, I'm glad. So glad. All right, let's talk about melody. So, what are notes? Notes are essentially just the relative highness or lowness of a sound. So you may have heard this as like frequency. Frequency is basically the same thing as pitch, and then pitch is basically what a note would be. So it would be considered a building block of music. In Western music, there are 7 letters in the musical alphabet. So A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. If you look at a piano's keyboard, there are 12 notes. So actually, let's pivot over here to here. And I might actually not use the push at all today, but I like to demonstrate with this here because we can actually see the keyboard down here. So again, if we start with, what did it say? A over here. Yeah. So 12 notes. So that would be A. And rather than just going up using the white keys, we're also going to go up incrementally with the black keys here. So this would be A sharp or B flat, B, C, C sharp or D flat, D, E, D sharp or E flat, E, F, F sharp or G flat, G, G sharp or A flat, A sharp or B flat, B. Oh, sorry. Went too far until it basically goes back up to A. So, right. So A to A is considered an octave apart. So basically, if you notice, they sound like the same pitch, but one is higher than the other. And that is because they are a different frequency or a pitch, different pitch. So the white keys on the keyboard are considered natural notes, while the black keys are considered sharps or flats. So I would say like one of the most important things to understand and kind of get a good grasp on, particularly when you're trying to come up with good melodies, but also it makes a huge difference when you're coming up with chords, which we'll talk about in a moment, is understanding intervals. So intervals really just means the distance between notes. So if you look at a keyboard, so it's very disjointed sounding, but it's really just the literal, like you can see kind of here, it's like a physical difference between the notes, but it also sounds a very specific way based upon that distance. If you play all the keys on a piano's keyboard in sequential order, going up or down, you're basically playing in half-step intervals. So kind of just like what I did here. Right? And I would say one of the most important things that I learned when I learned theory at a very early age is recognizing intervals. So growing up, they typically would like associate like a song with an interval. So when I say half steps, it sounds like this. Does this sound like a specific theme song from a specific movie to anyone? Kind of sounds ominous. Jaws, exactly. So as soon as you hear that, you're like, ooh, that's so ominous sounding. It's Jaws. Then you know it's a half step. So this is half step here to here. So this is A to A sharp, A to B. This would be considered a whole step. A to C. Sorry. That would be a minor third. And why do I say third? So, you know, again, the numbers are really referring to the distance between notes, but you know, we have sharps, right? That we have these like black keys here. So 1, that's a minor second. This is a major second or a whole note. So we have 2 different types. Actually, I think it might be easier to visually look at this here. I think I have, yeah. Major, minor, second. Yeah, okay. Cool. So we have intervals are described by the number, distance, and the quality type of interval. So we have the number, right, which is referring to the distance between the notes. So a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and a seventh, and an octave, which is an eighth. As mentioned, octaves are just the next or lowest pitch of the same note. So it's the same note, just an octave apart. Which are really just like 12 semitones apart, which we'll talk about semitones in a moment. And then in addition to the numbers, the intervals can be described as any of the following: major, minor, perfect, augmented, and diminished. Today, I think we're pretty much going to talk about major, minor, and perfect. But again, going back here. So actually, let's go here. So, A, to C. So if we count A, B, C, that's 3, right? A, B, C. So that would be a minor third. A to C sharp would be a major third. And notice the difference in the quality of the sound. So minor typically sounds sadder, and then major typically sounds happier. Minor third, major third. And then A to D is what's called a perfect fourth. And that is, the song for that is Here Comes the Bride. Here comes the bride. And then A to E is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Twinkle, twinkle. A to F is a minor 6. A to F sharp is a major 6. So minor 6, major 6. So I'm not going to go over all of them because I think that would take forever. But the concept that I really just wanted to drive in there is that the fact that intervals really just represent the distance between notes. And every single interval has a specific quality of sound. So, a minor third is going to sound a very specific way. Minor 6 is going to sound a very specific way. We have what are called like diminished and augmented intervals. And so it's kind of hard to play it on here, but let's use C as an example. So C, so this is a minor second, major second, minor third, major third, perfect fourth. So that sounds funky, right? Any idea what kind of interval this would be? C to F sharp. Any of you who took theory before? Any guesses? No? I'm just gonna wait a beat until anyone maybe. See, that is more pleasant sounding. C to G. Close. I would. Minor is more like if I go to C to D sharp here. It sounds sad, right? But versus C to, it just sounds, there's something about that. It sounds very dissonant. When I say dissonant, it just kind of like sounds very like uneasy to the ears. C, D, E, F sharp. So kind of think of it like I have C. So C to F is a perfect fourth, and it's called perfect because it sounds so like pleasing to the ear. It sounds perfect. But as soon as I raise this F sharp here, So we're kind of like augmenting this. We're like taking this thing that sounds perfect and we're raising it up a half step. So we're like augmenting it. So that would be an augmented, I believe an augmented fourth. But anyhow, we're gonna kind of focus more on major and minor intervals and just so you can be acquainted with them. But to recap here, so intervals described by the number of distance and the quality type of interval. Major typically sounds happy. Minor sounds a little bit sad. Perfect sounds very pleasing to the ear. Um, and then augmented and diminished intervals sound a little bit funky. I'll just leave it at that. They sound a little bit funky to the ears. They sound like a little bit off and kind of dissonant. Particularly diminished intervals actually sound pretty dissonant. Um yeah, augmented funky, diminished funky. So let's talk about keys and scales. So key signatures tell you what notes in a scale are sharp or flat, and they determine what the key of a song is, which is basically the tonal center. Um, I'm going to actually, someone asked a question about that. I'm going to use this definition to relate to that question. In Western music, there are 12 key signatures, each derived from the 12 available notes. And again, the 12 available notes we went over here, right? So if I went up the octave here, so say 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 notes, 12 keys. So someone asked, how do you find out which song your key is in? And then when you're mixing, how can you tell if Record Box has mislabeled the key? So I find that can be hard sometimes, but a couple of things that you can use here to kind of like help guide you, particularly if you're working in Ableton Live. Unfortunately, Ableton doesn't tell you what key you're in, but I'll talk about the tool in a moment. But if I'm using my ears, because this is mentioning the tonal center, right? Usually what I'm listening for is, and this is kind of where ear training can help you out, is where does it sound like it wants to go? Like where, and that's kind of like when you learn about ear training, we'll talk about scales in a moment. Usually they have you learn how to sing scales. Um, so, Sound of Music, do, re, mi, fa, right? Do, re, mi. Is it do, re, mi? Yeah. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's actually referring to the notes in the scale, right? And usually it sounds like it wants to resolve somewhere. So, like if I, were to end like this, that would drive me crazy. If the song just ended there and didn't take us back home, right? Where is home? So home is typically what's called the tonic, like kind of like what the song is in the key of. So in this case, if the song was in C, this would be home. This would be our main place that we want to resolve back to. So anytime I'm trying to determine what the key is, that's like kind of like one thing I'm looking out for is like, if I sing this to myself, where does it sound like it wants to kind of like go back to? Where does it want to resolve to? And if that note is say like A, I'm like, it probably is in A. So, but yeah, the way to kind of like figure that out too is understanding scales. So what are scales? Scales are considered another building block of music. They're basically notes within an octave that are arranged in order by their pitch. So we talked about the concept of intervals, right? So really what scales are, it's just like they're intervals. They're a series of intervals that start at a very specific note. And the descending or ascending interval relationships between each note basically defines the quality, the sound of the scale. And what's neat is then you can create notes from a scale, or you can use notes from a scale to create melodies and harmonies. Each note has a specific name or function, uh, which is then indicated by its position or number in the scale. So we kind of talked about this in terms of intervals, right? So first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. So if we use, let's say, and this is where we're going to use Ableton Live now rather than looking at this piano. If I, let's say, oh, let's make this longer here. So this is where using a DAW can really help you out if you don't understand theory. So in the clip section over here, like I created a MIDI clip, I can turn on this button that says scale. And what's really neat is I can actually choose the scale here. So I'm going to choose C, and then major is the type of scale. So what's really neat about that is when I select that, I turn that on, I enable it, every single row that we see here is highlighted, right? And I actually can click on scale, and it's only going to show me the notes that are within this scale. And why that is helpful is if I were to enable the pencil tool here by pressing B, I'm going to basically start at C. So again, if I'm in the key of C major, C is home. C is what's called the tonic. It's the first scale degree. So if I click here, I'm going to basically draw up here, like in a diagonal, and basically add a note in every single note that's within the scale going up, ascending, until I get to the next C. So remember, we go from C to C, which is an octave apart. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back to C. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes, right? Until it returns to back up an octave. There are literally so many types of scales. It's bananas. So what would this sound like? Oops, this is not long enough. Let's make this longer. Great. So that sounds like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? And that basically is what's called a major scale. And this is where I'm going to get nerdy because I just think it's really cool that this scale, this major scale, sounds the way that it does based upon the intervals, the quality, the type of the intervals. So just to remind you, if we were to look at, let's say, a keyboard, C to D, so these white notes here, we're skipping this black note here, this black key. So we're skipping C sharp. We're going straight from C to D. What kind of interval is that? So let me play a half note here just to remind you what that sounded like. That sounded really ominous, right? But this, C to D, sounds very pleasant. It's a whole step, right? It's a major second. Now if I go from here, up to D to E, we get another whole step, another major second. And then E to F, what kind of interval is that? Ooh, sounds ominous. That's our half step, right? Exactly. F to G is a whole step, and then G to A, another whole step, A to B, another whole step, and then B to C is a half step. So if we look at a major scale, for one, the general sound of it is it's like very happy sounding, bright sounding, but this is the interval pattern: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half steps. So what's really great about that is if I, let's say, change the scale to D major, right? It is the same exact pattern. All I really need to do is change this first note so that it starts at D. Ooh, that was not right. I need to shift some things around, but here we go. D, F, C, E, F sharp, G, A, C, B. There we go. So again, D to E, E to F sharp. So notice that in order to maintain the interval relationships, so the reason why it sounds major is because we have this whole pattern. E to, let's pull this up here. E to F is a half step, but we need to, in order for it to be a major scale, the second, basically the third note needs to be a whole step, right? And that means that we have to go up to F sharp, right? F sharp here, in order to maintain it, that relationship, and so that it can maintain, stay a major scale. So, and then F sharp to G. This is where we get our half step, right? G to A, whole step, A to B, whole step, B to C sharp, another whole step, and C sharp to D, right? Half step. So now you're like, okay, so why do we have these sharps? Why do we have these black notes that are introduced? One reason is it kind of helps us to maintain this interval relationship, right? And that way it can stay a major scale. So now in D major, that means that we have two sharps. We have an F sharp and we have a C sharp. Yes, the half step is the same thing as a minor second. Oh, actually, let me reread that. Is a half step the same thing as a minor interval? So a half step is the same thing as a minor second, specifically. Do all the major scales have the same interval pattern? Yes. So again, if I move from C to D major, it maintains that same interval pattern, but because of that, now it introduces two sharps. We have an F sharp and a C sharp. And if we go up a fifth now, we've got D major. If we went to, let's say, like A major, here. Let's move all these guys here. Here we go. Same pattern, right? And notice now we've got three sharps, because in order to maintain that pattern, we have to then add in these sharps here, right? To maintain the interval relationship between these notes, right? And maintain that whole half step pattern. So A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. And I'm not going to get into circle of fifths too much, but basically circle of fifths is one way to kind of determine how many sharps or flats there are per key. But the idea is if you go up a fifth, so a fifth meaning if I'm at D and I go up a fifth, which is A, right? So D, E, F, G, A. I'm going to introduce one more sharp. Yeah, that's how all the keys match the Do Re Mi song. All right, so now let's take a look if we make this minor. So I'm going to move this back to C. I'm going to use my trusty, oh, that's the wrong thing here. I'm going to move my trusty, use my trusty scale feature here, and I'm going to make sure that these notes match where these lanes are, colored lanes, so that I'm putting the notes in the correct places. So again, if you're not super familiar with theory, you can kind of use this as a guide. But let's hear what the minor scale sounds like. Ooh, that sounds quite different. It sounds a lot sadder, first of all. And again, if we take a look at this interval pattern here, we've got C to D, we still have our whole step, major second as the first, between the first two notes, but then going from D to E flat. So again, if we look at what that looks like, that would be, that's a half step, right? So D, so this is kind of where it differs between a major scale and a minor scale, is rather than going up a whole step, we're going up a half step when we go from the second to the third note. E flat to F, whole step, F to G, whole step, G to A flat, whole step, A flat to B flat, whole step, B flat to C. I think I just said that wrong, but let me go back here. Minor, sad and dark sounding. Our pattern basically is whole, half, whole, half, whole. So again, that's a pattern, right? So if I were to change this to, let's say, let's just change this to like F minor. Oops, let's turn that off. Let's hear what that would sound like. Sounds exactly the same, but the starting note is just different, right? So basically the same thing applies. And if you were to, as someone pointed out, there are a lot of scales. The most common ones that people are familiar with are major and minor. These other ones that we see here are what are called modes. And again, they're really referring to interval relationships between each note. Are just going to change based upon what you choose here. And then, you know, this, they're just like set on a specific starting note. So for example, let's just do like Dorian here. Starting on F. Actually, let's do same thing. We're gonna do D Dorian. Like this. Which sounds kind of cool. Or like Mixolydian. That's kind of neat. So again, scales really are arranged based upon their, you know, the starting note, but then also determines like kind of the scale, but then also the interval relationships is really going to determine the way that it sounds. And you can create melodies from them. So the reason why, so now that we kind of like have a base understanding of scales, it's good to understand the concept of intervals, and it's good to understand the concept of like major and minor scales, for example. But also understanding that if I were to create a melody, what would be a good melody? For one, it's usually one that's singable, but if I were to, let's say, I'm going to write something in like F minor here. Andre asked, do you ever use these deep cut scales, or what are your major, pun intended, scale picks? That's a really great question. Mixolydian would be a 60-day name. So actually, I think Royals by Lord is actually written in Mixolydian. I think there's like a few pop songs that are written in Mixolydian. I think I have like chosen like some of the modes before because I think they're kind of fun. I predominantly would say that I write in the boring scales, I guess, major and minor. But yeah, I would say if I were to use any of the other scales, it's usually like some of these what are called modes here: Dorian, Mixolydian, Lydian, Phrygian. Melodic minor is also just like another type of minor scale that's like pretty common. I don't know. These ones are, I haven't like gone through all of these. And actually, we'll probably talk about this when we do some courses or workshops on Live 12 a little bit later, but they have this whole new like tuning system that I would love to explore. So we'll get into that later. But yeah, so all right. Um, hold on, lost my train of thought for a moment there. Okay, so creating a melody here. So if I were to write in, let's say, like F minor, what would be a good note to start on? Honestly, it just like kind of depends. It depends upon what we'll talk about chords in a moment, harmony in a moment. It depends on like what chords you have, what the implied harmony is. But if you're like maybe starting with a melody, I would just like maybe see what notes are within your scale that you can use. So, you know, if I have, if I am in F minor, and actually if I'm writing a melody, I probably want to write up in a higher octave here. So let's just write in like uh, the F4 range here. Maybe what we could do is like start on G. And let's duplicate this so it's like a 4-bar phrase. And kind of like drift back to F since that's our home, and we can kind of start like between two notes. Let's turn on the metronome so we have a frame of reference with the pulse. So one thing I wanted to point it out is like, all right, I actually what I want to do first is like create a melody that's like not pleasing to the ear, just so you can hear the difference. So, I can choose like a random note here. Let's just like actually start with F. But what if I were to go up to like, let's say like E flat? Actually, oh, I just realized we're at 160. No wonder it feels so fast. I'm just gonna draw some random notes here. Can you sing that back to me? So one thing that I think that kind of makes for a melody that makes it really hard to latch onto, for the ear to latch onto, is one, if there's a lot of like big leaps. So usually like the most catchy melodies are ones where you remember them, right? They're ones that like you can sing in your head, or you maybe can like sing back to yourself. And I would say for the most part, it's like they're usually have like stepwise. When I say stepwise, I mean it's like literally like steps, right? We talked about the concept of like half steps, stepwise motions that have some sort of like recognizable shape, or like a kind of like a shape that seems like it makes sense versus like this. You can look at the shape here. This is what the shape looks like. It's kind of like all over the place, right? And then, usually like it has like a nice shape that's like easy to follow, and then usually repeats and then maybe like differs what happens at the end. So for example, um going back here, maybe we just like have like two notes, and then maybe we can do a leap now. So again, going back to the concept of intervals too, usually like fifths are really nice. Again, the concept of like we talked about like perfect fourths, right? They're also a fifth apart would also be considered a perfect interval, so perfect fifth. So when writing a melody, fifths are often used. I think thirds sound really nice too. So maybe, and again, we're in F, so a fifth would be C, right? And then a third would be A flat. Something like that, right? So it's like there's some repetition. In this case, it's like kind of like the second half is like more of like a response to the first half, so like a call and response. Elizabeth asks, is picking a scale to stick to the easiest way to write a melody? I struggle a lot with knowing which notes to stick to in a song because my lack of theory understanding skills. Absolutely. How it's just like how do you write a melody if you don't know the scope of what you're working within, right? It's just like at that point you're just like grabbing random notes. So yeah, I highly, highly recommend. Particularly if you're working in a DAW like Ableton Live where you have this tool where you can basically just pick a scale, I would highly recommend turning on the scale feature, picking a scale, and then using that to kind of like select what notes are at your disposal. And as you get more advanced with theory, then you can kind of like start picking notes that are even outside of the scale. Because that is actually a thing. But I would say like when you're starting out, it's a lot easier if you just kind of like work within the confines of the notes that are within a particular scale. And then my other pieces of advice is keep it simple. In this case, I had this particular clip where the notes are kind of just all over the place and they don't really quite make sense in terms of looking at the shape. If you look at the shape, it's just like this. Whereas if you look at this shape, this is like pretty smooth, right? And then there's a leap here, so stepwise motion, a little bit of a leap here, but then it's also stepwise, and it's like a phrase. So the second half is in response to what the first half is saying. Okay, so let's talk about harmony. Any questions about scales, notes, melodies before we move on? For starting out, would drums be a lower octave and melody chords be a higher octave? I'm not sure what you mean by that because drums are not particularly pitched. However, different drum elements do contain different frequencies that sit in different parts of the frequency spectrum. So, for example, if I have, let's say, a kick, right? Right? Our kick contains lower frequencies, so that would sit in like the low end of our frequency spectrum. And then we've got these like hi-hats would sit a little bit higher, and then this other percussive sound that I added that sits maybe like in the mid range of the frequency spectrum and maybe contains some higher frequencies as well. But I'm not sure if this is what you're asking. If you are creating chords, which I'll talk at, let me actually do this here. We're going to call this melody. I would highly recommend placing them in a specific octave and not in a low octave because this is kind of like relates more to mixing. But if you place your chords in a low octave, let's say where like the bass already is, then you get what's called frequency masking that occurs where things sound really muddy because all of those frequencies are basically just like sitting in the same place. So when I am, let's say, creating my chords, let's just like copy instrument here. Actually, we don't need that. I'm just gonna grab grand piano. Um, what I typically would do is rather than playing my chords in a low octave, like here, this is really low. That's also kind of low. I would probably opt to play them in like the C3 range. Depending upon where the bass is. Maybe here, C3. Actually, C3 is probably fine. Or like around here. And for one, I'm usually using my ear to hear where like the bass is sitting or the kick is sitting, and where all the other instruments are sitting. And I just want to make sure that I'm not playing too low or too high so it's not interfering with the other instruments. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, for sure. I'm sure it'll come back to you too. But yeah, as far as like melodies, like lead melodies tend to be in higher octaves, which is why if you notice, I put my melody here in the G4 octave, which is like, if you can just listen to it, it sounds pretty high. Right? It's just like in a higher octave. So, when all of my instruments and sounds are playing together, you can kind of easily separate out the sounds based upon the fact that it's playing in a higher register. Yeah, so like for range as melody, 4 range as melody, and 3 is best for chords. Maybe so again, I would just like kind of take those numbers with a grain of salt because certain instruments also are just like tuned a certain way. So even though it says C4, it doesn't always sound like it's in the C4 range. So you kind of just like have to use your ears. But yeah, I would say like generally speaking, my basses are like in the like C1 range, maybe, or C0 range, and then my chords would be in the 3 range, maybe, and the melodies would be in the 4 range. But it just like you kind of just have to use your ears, and then also use a frequency analyzer like Spectrum, Ableton Live Spectrum, to kind of see what's going on there. All right, so let's talk about chords. So chords are really just a combination of 2 or more notes that are played at the same time. They're generally considered building blocks of music, and they also can provide a base for creating melodies. Just like intervals, just like scales, we have also just like intervals, rather, is actually the first thing I said is correct. We have different types of chords. So we have major chords, which consists of a major third and a perfect fifth above the root. So actually, let's talk about that first. So I'm actually probably not going to play much today because that's what I wanted to show you. Let's actually turn that off here. Actually, let's work within C major here. So when I say a major chord here, so if we are, let's say in C major, I have C. If I add a third above C, so C, D, E, 3, right? We would have this. So this is a major third interval, and we can kind of, again, use our ears. That sounds kind of happy sounding. If I add another third above E, we have a G, so E, F, G. And if you count from C to G, so C, D, E, F, G, that's a fifth, which is considered, in terms of intervals, it's considered a perfect fifth. So twinkle, twinkle, little star, right? So, so again, and then if we play this together, all these notes together, stacked together at the same time, we get a very nice, pleasing, very pleasing chord here. And again, a major chord consists of a major third and a perfect fifth above what's called the root note. The root note meaning the bottom note here that kind of formulates this particular chord here. So this would be a C major chord, C, E, and then G. So similar to scales, the interval relationship can basically determines what type of chord it is. So if I were to, rather than using a major third, have a minor third be above our root note, above C, and then a perfect fifth above the root note, let's hear what that would sound like. So I'm going to switch this to C minor now. So C to E, flat. So that's a lot sadder sounding, right? So all of these notes together, C, so a minor third, and then C to G is still a perfect fifth. So that sounds a bit sadder, right? Yeah, so we've got major chords, minor chords, and then we talked a little bit about diminished and augmented, but a diminished basically consists of a minor third, which we just talked about, and then a diminished fifth above the root. So when I say diminished, that just basically means that I would bring the fifth note up here, the G, I would bring it down a half step. So actually I have to turn off scale here. So that would be me bringing G to F sharp. So remember how I used the word funky earlier? So this is diminished. That sounds not super great, right? And when I say not great, if you combine this with other chords, it could have like a really cool effect where it just like adds some like unexpected dissonance, right? So that's a diminished chord. An augmented chord consists of a major third above the root note. So C to E, right? What we had before with the major chord, and then an augmented fifth above the root. So augmented meaning that rather than bringing this a half step down, we would bring this a half step up. So let's hear what that sounds like. So augmented even sounds funkier. So as you can imagine, adding in augmented or diminished chords is just kind of a way to add some, ooh, what's happening here? That was not expected. All right, so major, minor, diminished, augmented chords. And triads are actually just what I just played now. They're made up of 3 notes. These are the most basic chords. They consist of the root note, which is the starting note, a third, and then a fifth. And then note how it says a third, 4 semitones above the root. So this is one other thing that we can relate to Ableton is anytime you see the word semitone. So for example, if I add in, let's say, do we have like a vocal sample here? Oh, I know. We can use this one. So like this one. So if I go into an audio clip, you'll see it says ST. So ST is referring to semitones, and semitones is the same thing as a half step. So if I take this, vocal here and pitch it up, let's say +1, I'm basically pitching it up a half step. If I go 7 semitones, that's 5 half steps, which is a fifth. Right? 12 semitones is an octave. So just something to keep in mind if you ever see semitones or ST written. Correct. So someone asked, so a root note is the starting note of the chord? Yes, the root note is the starting note. So in this case, if we, let's move this back. If we're in C major, C would be the root note. All right, so moving on, where it can get even more interesting, right? So if I have a C major chord, which is like kind of basic sounding, what if I were to add a third on top? Oops, I don't want this anymore. And actually, we're gonna do, just for sake of time, is I'm going to pair a chord progression with this melody here, so F minor. So so we're going to do F. And actually, what note do we have? We have G. Okay, so maybe, so I'm kind of doing two birds, one stone right now. What if we were to create a chord progression? Go with this chord. So since we have the first note that's being played as G, I'm going to create a G. Let's click on scale here. G, B flat, D. So I'm basically creating a triad, meaning we're starting with the root note, which is our bottom note. Then we're adding basically thirds above each note. So a third above G, a third above B flat. So G, B flat, D. Oh, actually, we don't want this to finish. All right, so let's play around here. So what if we were to... That's fine. Okay, so we're just going to do F minor, actually. That's nice. Now, what if we were to add a third above C? Another third. So C, E flat. Ooh. Actually, let me just solo this just so you could hear what that sounds like. So without this, with it. So it kind of adds like a little bit of like spice. So this, what I just added here, by the way, is called a seventh. So if we count out from F, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, this would be what's called a seven. And sevens are a really nice thing to add if you're just wanting to add some complexity to your chords. I feel like it kind of like jazzes things up a little. So yeah, that's just kind of like one thing that you can add to create some spice. So what other thing do I want to add here? Because we're going to talk about inversions in a moment. So let's talk about the idea of like building a chord progression. So basically chord progressions are just a series of chords played in a certain order. They provide foundation for harmony and melody. And then the key that you're in will determine what chords you can use. Usually Roman numerals are used to identify chords in a progression. So for example, for in C major, C major would be 1, D minor would be 2, E minor would be 3, and so on. The capitalization, uppercase or lowercase of these numbers here determines whether it's a major or minor chord. And again, depending upon whether it's like a major key or a minor key, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4 chord, which again is determined by kind of similar to what we're talking about scales, right? The number is just referring to the scale degree. So for in C major, the root note, the starting note would be C, and that would be our 1 chord. D minor. So actually, let's take a look at that. We're going to go back to the idea of building scales and building chord progressions on top of them. So if I'm, let's say, I'm just going to mute this for a moment. Actually, let's do this over here. If I'm, let's say, yeah, still an F minor here, and if I build out my scale, right, it'll look like this. Now, what would happen if I built a chord progression on top of it? So, right, F again. So if I'm building chord progressions on top of that, I'm basically building out my triad. So again, if I add a third on top of this F here, and then a third on top of the the A flat, right? And if I do the same thing here, so this is the 1 chord, this is the 2 chord, and then same thing here. I'm just basically adding thirds on top of, building out triads on top of each scale degree note here. And so if I count this out, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 1, 2, 3. Actually, let's do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we go back to our octave above the F, right? So this is all related. So, when we talked about scales and how every major scale, every minor scale is just basically made up of interval relationships, the same can really be true for major and minor keys. So and we're building out chord progression. So again, we're building out triads here. And if we talk about a 1 chord, it's going to be essentially in a major key, or sorry, in a minor key. Actually, well, we're kind of doing it backwards, but this is a minor key here. So we're going to take a look at basically what a 1 chord be, what a 2 chord would be, what a 3 chord would be. So do we actually have that listed here? No, that's great. Oh, here we go. No, that's okay. We'll just talk about it now over in Ableton. But basically a 1 chord in a minor key would be, what kind of chord does that sound like? Does that sound happy or sad? Is it a major chord or a minor chord? It's minor, exactly. So yeah, so minor, right? And then this is the 2 chord here. So G, B flat, D flat. This one is funky sounding, so that's going to tell us that it's diminished. And then the 3 chord here, A flat, C, E flat, is major. B flat, D flat, F. What does that sound like? Oh, you forgot? Well, it says it right here. We're in F minor. So this is a minor scale that we're in right now. So, and we can kind of think of it like we're in F minor, the key. Yeah, so F minor, G diminished. So this is the 2 chord, 3 major chord, 4 B flat, D flat, F. So I just want to hear the difference between, let's click on this guy here. If we were to make this B, D, F, B flat, D, F, that sounds happy, right? So that tells us that, oops. That tells us that this is minor. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 is minor. 5 is minor. 6, major. 7, and then 7, minor. Whereas, so I'm just going to actually label this with F minor. And then this is going to be major. So we're going to be in C major right now. And I'm showing you this to show you that a major scale, a major chord has a different relationship, has a different pattern basically in terms of like building out chord progressions and what chords are available. So again, we do C, E, G. Let's just build this out here. B. So building out our triads. And let's hear what this sounds like. Okay, that's very fast, but so this sounds remarkably different, right? It sounds brighter and happier compared to F minor. And again, there's a very good reason. So our first chord in the progression, so I haven't like really created an actual progression yet, but in C major, our 1 on the scale degree, right, would be C major, which is written with numeral 1. The second chord is minor. So D, F, A. So not diminished like it is in if you had, like, let's say like a minor, if you were working in a minor scale or a minor key, in major, the 2 chord would be minor. 3 is minor. 4 is major. 5 is also major. 6 minor. 7 is diminished. And then lastly, we're back at C major. So basically the thing to note, just because like we have limited time here, is if you're in major or if you're in a minor key, you have, based upon like what your starting note is, right? In this case, if we're in C major, it would be C. If we're in major, that just means that our 1 chord is going to be major, our 2 chord is going to be minor, and then so on and so forth. And at that point, all right, now we know which chords that we can use, right? So if I have C major selected, these are all of the chords, these are all of the notes that I can use. And then maybe I can kind of just like switch around and rearrange the chords based upon which chord I want to start with. So for example, maybe I want to start with the 2 chord and then go to 6. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? And then go to 1. And this is going to sound very awkward, but right, because it's kind of jumping all over. But that's kind of the idea. And then what I can do to kind of smooth out the way that it sounds, because it's kind of like jumping from here to here, is I can, let me just extend the length of these, is I can create what are called intervals so that it kind of helps to smooth one chord going to the next chord. So for example, if I were to, let's say, move this E down an octave, so I'm going to select this note, hold down the shift key and then press the down arrow to move this down, and then select this note here, hold down the shift key, move it down an octave, right? So basically these A's are in the same octave now. So let's hear what that sounds like. Sounds a little bit smoother. So compared to what I had before, right? And now it just sounds a little bit more smooth going from one chord to the next. And then, you know, I can do the same thing here. Click here, hold down the shift key, press the down arrow, hold down, click here to select the note, hold down the shift key, press the down arrow. Maybe do the same thing here, click here, hold down the shift key, press the down arrow. And let's hear what that sounds like. That sounds a lot smoother than what I played earlier. So basically the idea of inverting notes is you're taking a chord, right? So something like this, and you're inverting the note. So, you know, if we have a C major chord, C is our root note, right? And we can basically like maybe just take this G, bring it down an octave. So now G is our bottom note, right? Or we can take this E, pull it down an octave here. So now E is our bottom note. And so we have the same notes in the chord. It's just the quality of the chord just sounds different. And where that's really helpful is when you're creating these chord progressions, it just kind of like makes the chord progression sound a little bit smoother rather than the notes jumping all over the place. So going back to this example of creating a chord progression here. And by the way, does anyone have any questions about, I'm going to end in a few minutes and then open it up to questions, but does anyone have any questions about anything I just went over? But yeah, so if I wanted to build out a chord progression here, so again, we're in F minor. And okay, what chords do I have at my disposal? What I could do again is do what I did similar to what I did before, where I basically just draw out. Right? And then build triads above these notes and kind of figure out, all right, what chords do I have? Or, I can click here to turn on scale, and then I can basically see what chords are at my disposal. So if I'm starting with F, maybe I would want to go to something like the 5 chord. I feel like that's pretty common. Also, one thing I'm going to actually throw in the chat that's really handy is I didn't have it here, is a really great resource called Hook Theory. Where if you're not super familiar with like common chord progressions, it basically has a lot of like different pop songs and just like I would say like more popular common songs, and it has all of the tabs, meaning that it has like all of the chord progressions for all of these songs, and also the different voicings, meaning the different inversions that you can play for those songs. And I feel like it's a really great resource for kind of figuring out some common chord progressions, and also chord progressions that tend to sound pretty good. Yes, choosing your inversions is called voicing, correct. Tone gym is also really awesome. I agree. It's a great way for training your ear for ear training. Agreed. Oh, wait, that's just the same tab. Tone gym. Oh, is it not that? Tone gym. It's probably tone gym dot something else. Yes. This guy? Yeah, Tatsio. To practice inverting, do you recommend us drawing out the triads first and practice moving things around? Yes, exactly. And usually what I'll do is I'll just move the notes around to hear what sounds the best. And I kind of just play around with that. But yeah, lastly, I guess, like, yeah, what I would do is I would maybe like figure out, all right, maybe I want to go from the 1 to the 5. So that would be C, E flat G, and then maybe let's practice some inversions. Oops. That sounds kind of nice. And sometimes I do use my ear. I'm like, where does it sound like it wants to go to? So maybe this B here. So something like that, where it's like, how did I come up with this? First off, seeing what notes are in chords are within the scale and key that I'm working in. Figuring out what sounds good with the notes that are being played. And then, I can kind of use some theory to guide me, like what chord progressions are common. So, for example, maybe starting on the 1, going to the 5. But a lot of times, honestly, I am using my ear. And because I've done so much ear training, I can kind of like hear in my head where a note wants to resolve to, and then I can maybe build out like triads from that. But then I'll like experiment with like, ooh, what notes can I add to that to kind of create some tension, you know? Which chords are those you just wrote out? That's a great question. So I mean, this would be, so we're in F minor right now, so this would be the 1. And then let me ask the chat, what would this chord be if I have? So this is inverted. I will give you a hint. The root note is C. So basically, it's C, E flat, G. And if I'm in F minor, what would this chord be? The 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3, the 4, the 5, if C is our root note. Guesses? No. It is it's the 5. Yeah, exactly, the 5. And then we're going here. So what do we got here? G, B flat, E. So again, I'm like, how do I know what chord this is? Well, if I'm like thinking in triads, right? Third, so E, G, B. So E would be our root. So F, G, A, B, C, D, E would be the 7. So 1, 5, 7. And then it goes back to 1 actually. But we've added some funky notes here. Actually, hold on, sorry, I lied. So it could be D, F, A. Which would be F, G, A, B, C, D, just a 6th chord. But then I've added a G, which is kind of just like a, if we were to count that up, that would be like basically placing a 2nd kind of to add some tension here. So, but yeah, so it's just, I'm kind of just like using a combination of understanding theory, but then like also using my ear and leaning into experimentation to hear what sounds cool. Any other questions? As mentioned, yeah, I would definitely check out those resources. Hook theory is great. I really like being able to see, this is really, really helpful, being able to see, let's say like a TheoryTAD database. Like if I don't know, search like Carly Rae Jepsen or, okay, sure, Backseat featuring Carly J. Repson, Charlie by Charlie XCX. And then if I, let's say, go to piano, look at guides here. Let's look at, I always forget how to do this. Oh, chords. If I click on chords here, it tells us the chord progression, but then it also shows us the inversions and the voicings of how it's being played. And I will just tell you here, like, inversions and voicings make a huge difference in terms of what the progression sounds like. So I highly recommend checking this out because it's like a really great resource for kind of just like being able to see and hear different voicings, and also just being able to see what kinds of chord progressions exist and what they sound like to use as a guide. All right. You're welcome. If there aren't any more questions, I think we're gonna wrap up for today for sure. I know it was very, very basic. Thank you for being patient with me today. This week was an extra hectic, chaotic week. But we'll have more of these. I know that there's a thirst for theory knowledge, and I would love to do future workshops that dive in a little bit deeper as well. Have a bit more space to kind of go a bit more in depth. It is, oh, no wonder it's a pre-retrograde week. That makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I gotta go get ready for the show. But yeah, thank you everyone for all of your comments and questions in the chat, and it's in between solstices. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. But yeah, I'm gonna go get ready now. And yeah, to those who are coming, I'm excited to meet you in person. And yeah, have a great weekend. Until next time, I'll see y'all soon. Bye bye.